All right, so if you own a business that designs and sells kitchens, I am going to make a prediction. And that is that at some point over the last 12 months, you've looked at your turnover figure and thought, where's all the money gone? You've sold kitchens and you've been busy, the diary's even been full, the team's been working hard, and yet somehow there's just never any money left over at the end of the month. So if that sounds familiar, today's video is for you, because what I want to talk about is what I believe the biggest single financial mistake is being made by kitchen business owners. And no, it's not lead generation, it's not marketing, it's not sales, it's margins. So one of the things that amazes me about the KBB industry is how many businesses don't actually know whether their margins are good or bad. So often they'll know their turnover. They'll say, I'm doing 800 grand a year, I'm doing about $1 million a year. They know how many kitchens they've sold, roughly whatever, 30 in a year, 40 in a year. They probably know how many appointments they've got in a month. But if you were to ask them what their average gross margin was over the last 90 days or last year, a lot of them genuinely wouldn't know. And I know that firsthand because I interview every single member that comes into the KBB collective. And most of them don't know that off the top of their head. And that's a problem because gross margin underpins absolutely everything else in your business. So you could have brilliant marketing, you could have amazing salespeople, you could have a fantastic showroom. But if the margin isn't there, eventually the maths is going to catch up with you. You cannot escape bad maths. So I often use the analogy of a bucket that has a hole in the bottom. Most businesses think the answer to growth is just pouring more water into the bucket, which in this case would be more leads, more inquiries, more appointments, selling more kitchens. But if there's a massive hole in the bottom of your bucket, all you're doing is you're losing water faster. And that's exactly what happens when a business with poor margins starts investing heavily into growth. So your revenue might increase, but the workload's going to increase, the stress is going to increase, and profit is barely going to move. And in some cases, it actually gets worse. So the reason that most KBB businesses survive with poor margins is actually only because the owner is effectively subsidizing the business. And that's because they're doing the job of the managing director, they're doing the job of the salesperson, they're helping with design, they're solving customer issues, they're probably doing the project management job as well, they're dealing with suppliers, they're doing HR, they're doing finance. They're effectively doing everything, which means that the business appears profitable because they're not having to pay those members of staff that they would otherwise have to. But it's not reality. And so the owner is carrying 3 or 4 salaries worth of responsibility. But the moment they try and step back or hire people to help, the cracks start appearing, okay? Because suddenly the business has all of this overhead that it was never set up to sustain. And the overhead is going to expose the weak margins very, very quickly. Okay, so we're talking about margins, how important they are. Cool. What do good margins look like? So just before manufacturers start shouting, these numbers are primarily for retailers. Manufacturers, you have slightly different benchmarks and hurdle rates for gross margins, but today's more about the retail side. So rough guide, below 30% gross margins, you've got a problem. I'm not saying the business can't survive. I mean, many do, but you're making life incredibly difficult for yourself. And the minute you start investing in the growth of the business, you start hiring, it's going to be a world of pain for you, okay? 30 to 35%, it's not great, it needs attention. 35 to 40%, we're getting somewhere. 40 to 45%, gold star for you, pat on the back, really, really healthy. 45% plus, outstanding, okay? The important thing here isn't obsessing over the specific number, it's understanding where you sit today. Because if you're at 31%, but you've got competitors operating at 43, you're playing 2 completely different games. One of you will have money to invest and the other does not. So let's make this practical. Imagine you've got 2 businesses, both selling £1 million worth of kitchens. Business A is operating at 30% gross profit. Business B is operating at 40% gross profit. Business A is going to generate 300 grand a year in gross. Business B, 400 grand a year. That's £100,000 different on the same turnover, the same level of work, the same number of kitchens in the same market. But that 100 grand extra would be used to go on staff, marketing, training, or profit. And that's why margins matter, right? Everyone obsesses over turnover because it's an easy number to come up with, but very few people obsess over what they actually keep at the end of the year, and that's the gross profit, okay? So how do we improve gross profit? Fundamentally, there are only 2 ways to improve your margins, and that is either you improve or increase prices or you decrease costs. That's it, right? There's no secret third option. Pretty straightforward. Most KBB business owners immediately look at costs. Can I negotiate harder with suppliers? Can I consolidate volume to negotiate extra price breaks? Can I move the ranges? Can I improve terms? And absolutely, you should be doing all of those things. And the best operators that I know in the market are going back to suppliers once a quarter and reviewing their suppliers and saying, what else can you do for me? How much more can we improve? Are there other suppliers that are willing to give us better terms? They don't just accept whatever the supplier tells them and leave it untouched for the next 5 years. But the biggest opportunity is often in pricing. And this is where I want you to think carefully. Let's say you're converting 60, 70, maybe even 80% of everything that walks through the door. You might think, amazing, I'm good at sales, I've got a good conversion rate. Maybe, but in a lot of cases, it's because you're too cheap. Because if almost everyone's buying, the market might be telling you that you're leaving money on the table. And so one of the easiest tests I ask people to perform is, what happens if you increase prices by 5%? Do your conversions collapse, or would they barely move? Because if they barely move, you just improve the profitability across the entire business overnight from doing nothing else. So you don't have to spend more on marketing, you don't have to get new leads in, you don't have to have any new staff, nothing else, just better pricing, okay? So I suppose what I want you to leave thinking about is this. Before you think about meta ads, before you think about lead gen, Google, before you think about hiring, anything else, ask yourself the one simple question, which is your bucket leaking, okay? And if the answer is yes, every bit of growth that you create is going to become harder than it needs to be. So you want to fix your margins first, right? Patch the bucket up. Then we're going to move on to part 2 of this series, which is conversion rate, okay? And so listen, if you like that video, if you think that's relevant for you, click the link below. You can apply to work with us. We're working with about 35 KBB businesses up and down the UK at the moment, rapidly growing because these guys are getting insane value from it. So if you want to find out more, click the link below and fill in the form. If not, I'll see you next week.